All right, hello and welcome to whomever may be listening. In this short video, we're going to be having a discussion about planning and project management. Why are we doing this? Well, it's an opportunity for me to showcase my abilities. I'm Tom Morgans. I'm a planner and project manager with an engineering background, 12 years experience, with the last 4 of those being in planning and project management of some form. I'm joined by Dylan.
Hello, I'm Dylan. I am an IT project manager. I've been in the IT industry for 40 years, focusing on project management for the last 20 of those years. So, talk me through the process of planning, Tom. Let's talk kickoff. Where do you start?
That's a really good question. So, uh, the first phase, the kickoff, is what I like to call the initiation phase. So here you're essentially trying to do 2 things. You're trying to establish, first of all, what our scope is at a high level, but what our scope is. So what are we here to contribute? We're also trying to seek out at this point our human interfaces. So what are we here to contribute? And indeed, who is going to be giving that information? Who are we going to be communicating with?
And where will you get that information from?
Well, depending on where, on the organization or the project, a number of different places perhaps, or different documentation, but it's predominantly documentation. Again, it might have a different name depending on where you are, but it could be, something as simple as a high level design. It could be a POA, project on a page. It could be a project mandate, and you're going to be delivered that by probably by, well, other members of your interfaces, as I've alluded to, but it could be your project architect, it could be your steering group, it could be the management team. Again, it's different places, different people, different documents, but the process is the same. In the initiation phase, we're trying to work out what are we here to contribute, and who are we getting that, who are our human interfaces, who are we getting it from, with a view to drilling down through the documentation, going from a HLD to an LLD, for example, to indeed seek out our inputs.
Okay, so you've got your project mandate. That's told you initially what it is that, at a very high level, what it is that you want, that the business wants you to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Will that give you the human interfaces? How will you know who to speak to?
Possibly, yeah. So a lot of the human interfaces are going to be in that in the HLD, for example. So a person you're going to be speaking to a lot. It depends again on the nature of the project and what you're there to deliver. But your designers, your architects, your technical people are going to be in high level design, in the project mandate, in the POAP, even the project on a page. You're going to be given sort of key stakeholders within the business, within the project. Your steering group's possibly going to be identified in there. Not to mention, of course, someone in the very first place has got to give you this. So that is a good indication of an interface, the person who's handed you the project in the first place. That's probably come from your steering group or your management committee of some form. So just by asking around and reading this documentation that's been handed to you, quite quickly you can establish who your interfaces are. I find there's usually only a few of them. In fact, you don't want to overdo your interfaces. You want to control your information flows. You want to get it coming correctly and from the right people. And usually the right people is a small amount of people. Again, your architect, your steering group.
Okay, so you've got your architect, probably an analyst if additional analysis needs to be performed.
A lot of the analysis is possibly done at this phase, but sure, you can work with if additional analysis is required, or let's just say analysis is the project that the nature of the project itself is requires analysts. Then sure, yeah, you can absolutely get information from them. They can be an input, a very key input, in fact, depending on what you're doing.
Okay, so you've got your analyst, produced your requirements document. That's fed into your architect. Your architect is going to produce, you said, an HLD. What's that?
A high-level design. So that's a broad overview, a technical broad overview of what your scope is. So if you're going to be building a house, for example, that'll be a broad look at the house. So it's going to be a detached dwelling, 3 stories, double garage, something like that. So that would be a high-level design. And in the IT industry, it would, if it's an infrastructure that you're rolling out, for example, it would tell you again, at a high level, what's going to be rolled out. If it's a new building that has a new infrastructure, it's going to have a new infrastructure put into it. It's going to give you a layout of your access layer, your sort of network access. It's going to give you an idea of what that sort of terminates back to. It's going to give you your back end, your distribution, perhaps maybe an overview of the Wi-Fi access. Who knows? It depends on the project, but it's a high level look at what's going on, a sort of 30,000 foot view, if you will, of the project.
So what's the benefit of that then? Does that start to feed your plan, or do you need something more detailed before you can start planning?
You're referring to the to your inputs, as in what you need to input into the plan. Yeah, I mean, inputs come from wherever they come from. They can come from the HLD or the early stages. Probably you could get an idea of what could be your summary tasks at a higher level, and work out your logic, how you're going to roll out the plan, sort of a first look at your critical path, for example. But the more you drill down into the detail, into the weeds of a project through your lower level documentation, like your lower level design, for example, that's where you're going to really find your inputs. I mean, it's just a question of allowing them, like I referred to it earlier as fallout, allowing them to fall out, to discover them almost, and then inputting them into the plan. Again, working with your architect perhaps and your team to pass that point, work out your dependencies, work out your cost per resource, work out how long each thing's going to take, which will ultimately give you your critical path. We're talking waterfall here more than we are agile, but that's going to give you your critical path and tell you when something is going to be complete and how much it's going to cost.
Okay, so you've committed your contractual deliverable to a plan. You know how long it's going to take. You know at this stage how much it's going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
What if it's suddenly decided that something's missing? What if the customer says you need to be there's another element that we hadn't yet thought of?
Sure. Well, it's a good question. So it all depends, I suppose, on have you baselined at this point. So if you're still inputting your inputs into the plan pre-baseline, then additional information is additional information. Now that's got to be managed correctly and logged correctly. This is a formal environment at the end of the day. It's every little thing can have major consequences further down the line. But it is information that's got to be inputted, and serious communication between the right people has got to take place. If it's happening after baseline, that's a very, very, very different story, and that then becomes a change. It's got to go through change. It's got to go through the change process. It's got to be logged as a change. It's got to go through change management. Again, you've got to communicate with the necessary people, saying that your steering group, your architects, and all your other key interfaces. We can absolutely, you want to be helpful. You want to say to your client, for example, your customer, we can absolutely do this, but we have indeed baselined at this point, so this is going to have to be managed correctly, and it's going to have to be escalated to the necessary people for approval, because this will ultimately lead to us changing the plan. It's going to have a cost implication. It's going to certainly have a time implication, perhaps. So,
but you're the project manager. Surely that decision is within your gift. Aren't you in charge?
Absolutely not. No. I am merely, if you've post baseline or even pre baseline baselining of a plan, let's talk post baseline to keep to keep this simple. Once that project by the PMO and by the stakeholders, by your interfaces, once you've all agreed upon a certain deliverable, and that plan has been baselined, you are now merely a keeper of that plan. It's absolutely not within your power, nor should it be, to just make changes, and certainly changes that aren't properly managed correctly. You need to go to the necessary interfaces and say, look, this is what we've been asked. This is a change. It's going to have these implications. I'll need approval for this. You're a keeper of the plan, and you're merely responsible for the money. It's not your money. So you need to get permission, in effect. That a change does need to be approved, and if it's approved, you need to go back to the PMO and back to your interfaces and have it re-baselined, so that everybody, you've got your contract has now changed, and it can be implemented into the existing plan, into the existing critical path, if you will, the existing timeline as part of phase one, or it could also be introduced as its own separate phase later on. It depends on the nature of the change and how the severity of it, I suppose.
And again, that would be the decision of the steering committee of the project board.
If it's come from the client, it will be escalated to the steering committee and the project board. Yeah, it will be down to them post probably a change review to either accept or decline that change or phase it. But it does require rebaselining and certainly requires management. And it's certainly not, as a project manager, your responsibility to just say, yes, we can do that, because you're breaking your contract.
All right. So the happy path is that you go back to your customer and you say, I've had approval to introduce this change. You must understand that it's going to take this much longer and it's going to cost this much more.
Yeah.
What about if the steering committee doesn't want to, for any reason, they want to introduce that as a separate phase later on, and they want to continue to commit to delivering what you've signed up to according to the existing plan? How do you break that news to your customer?
Well, again, you're the keeper of the plan, and they've not given you permission. The authority has not given you permission for this change, so you're only reporting that. It's not personal. It's of course it's not personal, but you're only reporting on what the plan is telling you, and in this case, the change has not been permitted. So if they're not happy about that, at the end of the day, it has been known for it to be escalated to where the client and the committee are communicating, because it's above you at this point. You are merely the keeper. You really are.
All right. So we've covered change control. That's an interesting point. We've said that you need to re-baseline the plan following an approved change. We've spoken about cost and time. Are there any other aspects to the planning process that could affect, I suppose, the delivery?
Absolutely, yeah. So you've got risks and issues. We can talk risks and issues. So a risk being something that could happen, an issue being something that has happened. They do happen. They absolutely do happen. The important thing is to recognise them as early as possible and log them like a change. Log them as early as possible.
So give me an example of a risk. What do you mean by a risk?
A risk. So for example, you need a certain amount. Let's say the plan requires a certain amount of engineering resource at a particular date. Let's say 6 months ahead of where you are. You're going to need so many engineers for so many weeks, so many months. And it turns out that another project is using that resource, and that resource isn't. You've discovered that resource is possibly not going to be available because of a clashing project. Okay. That's a risk. It hasn't happened yet. It might not happen, but it's a risk. It could happen. So you absolutely need to log our risk and make the steering committee and all the necessary interfaces aware that this is a risk. And
why would you bother the steering committee with that information if it hasn't happened? If there's just a possibility of the plan slipping, then why at this stage would you feel the need to give the project?
Because the earlier you try and solve the issue, the longer you've got to fix it. You need to make them aware that if we've got a resource issue 6 months from now, we're going to need to get contractors in, for example, to temporary, on a temporary basis, on a freelance basis, perhaps, to solve this issue. Not to mention that if you don't say anything, and the risk does happen, and then becomes an incident or an issue, it's a very different thing. You're going to be responsible for not mentioning that and not logging that, or even not seeing that.
Potentially not giving the steering committee time to do anything
about it. Yeah, you're going to slip, and then that's not what you want as a project manager. It's your job to deliver this project as per the agreement, as per the contract, and you want to do everything you can to do that. I find people aren't necessarily off put by bad news as long as there's a solution and as long as it's been noticed in time and dealt with correctly and managed correctly.
All right. So we've spoken a fair bit about upward management there, I guess you'd call it, reporting upwards, identifying risks, issues in plenty of time. What about
communication?
Management. What about managing how how do you help ensure that that you stick to the plan? You deliver according to when you said you were going to deliver.
There's a few ways I can answer that question. So I would say communication is absolutely key. We've talked about change. So you want to properly manage change. You want to avoid scope creep, for example. So that's something we've already really talked about. But I guess a good way to answer this question is by demonstrating just how important communication is in all directions.
So I think what I'm trying to get at here is that your engineers have committed during the planning implementation meeting that they're going to deliver what they've said they're going to deliver in a certain time. Do you just leave them to that and come back in 6 months' time?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So depending on I guess you could say one of the elements would be how long the project is. If it's a 6 month project, it might be a little bit different than if it's a 2 year project. But regular communication is key. So for me, I will run a weekly roundtable or a daily roundtable if it's a smaller project. Daily reports, for sure, to all the key interfaces, so they know exactly what the progress of any given day or any given week is. And in those reports, in those meetings, you're going to be discussing progress. You're going to be discussing where we need to be, where we are. You're going to be discussing risks.
And presumably using the plan to demonstrate in those meetings.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, just in my meetings, for example, I'm always first in, and I to be first in is always obviously good practice as the manager, but I like to be first in because I have the plan on the screen. I'm sharing my screen, so when people arrive, there's no basic pleasantries, but there's no sort of what are we talking about? There's the plan's up. Here we are. We know what we're doing. We can see, and then just running through the minutes of the previous meeting. So it's very important to not just have a meeting and not capture any of the data that comes out of the tasks, potentially that the changes, whatever that come out of the back of that meeting. You've got to capture that, minute it, and continuously be communicating, I think, is the key word there. Continuously make sure that you are on plan, you are raising, you are raising and logging risks, raising and logging issues, resolving them as fast as possible, escalating them to the necessary place, and as we've already spoke about, managing change is vital.
All right, so that's interesting. So you've got let's say you've got a resource who has reported to you that they can't complete the task. They don't believe that they complete a certain task by the end of the week, which they had previously committed to, and it could be because I don't know, perhaps there's a test rig that isn't available to them. A blocker of any sort. How would you manage blockers?
So, okay, it's a good question. So you're gonna have. I mean, this is gonna possibly now at this point. This is it's something that's come up on you like that, sprung up on you like that last minute. Then this is possibly going to create slippage. It is a risk because it technically hasn't happened yet, but it's probably too soon to. There's always going to be things that cause slippage.
I mean, hopefully you will have already identified this as a risk because
correct.
The test rig.
Yeah. But you're going to get your lights are going to go amber, hopefully not red, but they're going to you're going to get a couple of amber lights that are suggesting that things are slipping, whether it be cost, whether it be time, or a combination of the two. So at that point, if of course you're going to try and do what you can do to solve the problem, you're going to try and find additional resource, or maybe bringing a last minute third party. Who knows? But it needs to be escalated. It needs to be made aware. It needs to be logged as an issue if it is indeed an issue at this point, and the plan does indeed need to be altered accordingly if that is what's going to happen.
But if there's another project manager working alongside you that insists that their project is more important than yours, that they need the test rig, that they need the resource. I mean, what do you do? Do you strip to the waist and arm wrestle with him?
No. It's not my job to do that. My job is to take care of my project and be the keeper of my plan. All I can do is spot it as early as possible, log it as early as possible, and escalate it as early as possible.
Escalate it to who?
Well, it depends who it needs to be escalated to, but certainly, if it's going to make an amber light, I would certainly say, the relevant steering committee members need to be aware of that, because they need to be the ones that say it's their choice, it's their call at the end of the day, not yours, to say this project's Tom's project's more important than this other project over here, and therefore we're going to have the resource, and they're not going to have the resource, or vice versa. If it is the other way around and they have the resource and you do end up slipping, you've logged that, you've done what you can, and you've now accounted for that slippage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting to be honest.
Okay.
You know, the ability to identify that sometimes there is somebody above the two of you as project managers that is better placed than you are to make the decision about which piece of work is more important. So yeah,
right.
No, that's exactly what I mean. So what about little additional pieces of work where the customer comes up and says, you know, can you just fit this on a little additional piece of work, and it's hardly worth going to the steering committee with a change. How do you manage that?
We can just do this, can't we? Just let that one slip through. No, it's got, in a formal environment, it's all got to go through change management. Any change has to be properly managed, and because it's not your money. It's not your money. It's you have a contract. You have baselined a project that says you're going to deliver this deliverable on this date at this cost. It may be the smallest thing, but if you've got a 2-year project, the smallest thing can indeed cause major slippage way down the road. Amber lights everywhere. It could cost you a fortune. It could delay the projects by a significant amount of time. So no, I never do it. And I've been you don't necessarily you're not always popular for even for turning down even the smallest things and insisting they go through change control, but you just have to. It's not up to you. It's bigger than you. Again, you are the keeper of that plan, and you need to be absolutely sure that whatever goes into that plan is done formally and properly.
I understand. Close down, hand over to support. Where do we go from delivery?
Well, once the project's complete and you've come to the end, and you're hoping, and usually it all goes well if you do it properly. But yes, there does come a point where you've got to indeed hand over to whomever is going to take the finished project on with your team. You're going to do a proper handover. So that is the handover of documentation. That could be a glorified, depends where you are, what you call it, but it could be a glorified snagging list if one exists. So these things are yet to be, shall we say, tested, complete, who knows, but if there's anything that's left to be done in any way, this will all be pre-agreed upon, but you're going to hand that over to them anyway, because it's now their job to take care of those.
And who are they?
Whoever you're handing over to. So if it's a
support team of sorts,
the client, the support team, if it's internal and it's got to go to the support team. So let's say it's a new product or service that you're launching. When it's launched and it's now available as a product or a service, it's down to support to keep that thing going, to keep it alive. So you're on to the next project at this point.
Okay.
But,
and then once support are satisfied that they'll be able to deal with any queries that come in over the phone adequately because of the information that you've handed over to them, and they've got their scripts, etc., and they know where their handoffs are.
We'll take them through it. Once
the project is delivered and the product is comfortably in the hands of the support people and the client, as you say, the customer.
Mm-hmm.
What's next? How do you close down a project?
Well, you've got to make sure that everything is complete on the plan. You've got to communicate that everything's complete.
Reconcile your finances, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah. I guess so. Reconcile your finances, absolutely.
Is there any money left over?
If there's any money left over, then that's something that's, as you say, reconcile your finances. That's something that you've got to communicate to your steering group and perhaps the PMO or whomever the interfaces might be. But you've got to let them know that this is now complete. This is how much it ultimately ended up costing. They would have done that. They would have been involved in the handover, but the handover has been done. and there'll be an official close down at some stage. Again, different organizations will call it different things, but there'll be possibly, I've worked on projects before where they have a closed down document. Is essentially a certificate where it gets stamped.
And does that need, yes, okay, that needs to be stamped, that needs to be signed off by the steering committee, the client, and support, I suppose.
Yeah, support at the client. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whoever the interfaces are, that whoever needs to be signing, who has a stakeholder, I guess you'd call them, whoever has a say in the delivery. It's almost like the other end of baselining. It needs to be stamped, and then once that's done, you've delivered, you've contracted. You're no longer contractually in contract because you've delivered your deliverable, and the necessary people have signed to say we've taken delivery.
Project ended.
Project ended. On to the next.
Thanks very much,
Dylan. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.